Wow. Wow. You know, we shouldn't be surprised by this. And to be perfectly honest with you, this is not all that surprising, but that is the problem. This story should be surprising. This story should be cause for outrage, but instead, it's just another blurb in the mainstream news cycle. Another one of the dozens of stories where the rights of biological women are being absolutely trampled to ensure that the rights of one confused person are being honored. This past Friday, I was having lunch with one of my good friends. Haven't seen each other in a couple of weeks, so we were catching each other up with everything going on in our lives. He was telling me that he has been busy moving his stepdaughter to college and that she just finished rushing her sorority. Now, I've never understood the appeal for fraternities and sororities. I've never understood why you would pay tens of thousands of dollars to be treated like shit for a week while you're being initiated. Hell, there are street gangs that will treat you like garbage and they'll initiate you for free. But, millions of people have joined frats and sororities, so there must be something redeeming about them. But with that being the case, I'm sure there are many parents in the same situation as my friend's in now, sending your 18-year-old daughter off to college to join a sorority. Now, when he was telling me about this last week, not one time, not once, did the question enter my mind, are there any dudes in this sorority? When I was in college, dudes joined fraternities, young women joined sororities. Matter of fact, the very first requirement needed to join a fraternity, you had to have a dong. If you didn't have a propeller in your pants, you were not allowed to join. But that was back in ancient times. That was 20 years ago. As a country, we have become much more sophisticated. According to deacons at Woke United Methodist, the country has progressed in the last 15 or 20 years. We are no longer being restricted by gender-based requirements. Hell, it seems like we have an entire generation of kids who can't even define gender, much less select a gender to identify with. One of the more progressive campuses in the country is located in the state of Wyoming. Now, when I think of Wyoming, I think of the countryside. I would assume the state is filled with normal people. If you asked me if Wyoming was being overrun with the woke fungus, I would tell you no, and I would be wrong. Back in March, the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, they filed a lawsuit against the inclusion of someone named Artemis Langford. Artemis? Is that the birth name or the identifier name? It sounds like the name of the next alien that Mike Freeman is trying to seduce, but let me take a moment here to introduce you to the beautiful Artemis Langford. Check it out for yourself. Now, I would assume this picture on the left is the artist formerly known as Art, and the picture on the right is the new and improved identifier known as Artemis. Artemis Langford is a 6'2" biological male who is choosing to identify as a woman. Now, that distinction, that is very important to remember as we keep going. Artemis hasn't went through with the transition. Artie hasn't went through gender-affirming care or all the other medical requirements to transition from male to female. Artemis simply decided that he was self-identifying as a woman and wanted to join this sorority. Initially, the sorority had no problem approving Artemis for membership. And to be honest with you, this is where I have to blame the young women in this sorority just a little bit. I know this generation's all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know those three words sound really nice when you're chanting them at the Antifa rally while your emotional support goat is preparing fresh turds for the grill. But as these young women are finding out, inclusion is a completely different story when it's put into practice and it directly affects you. Part of me doesn't feel bad for these young women because they did this to themselves. They voted. They agreed to allow Artemis Langford to join the sorority, but once Artie began living in the house, their tune suddenly changed. But KC, as young women, we have the right to change our minds. Oh, yeah. You know who says shit like that? People who can't make up their own mind. These young women should have taken a stand from the beginning. Instead, they put themselves in this awkward, uncomfortable living situation. Now, this lawsuit was filed back in March. These young women, they wanted the courts to revoke the membership of Artemis Langford. There were some horrifying details included in this complaint. Apparently, Some of the girls were changing clothes in the house one day, probably comparing shoes, makeup, and outfits. Does this make me look fat? Oh no, girl, flaunt those curves. Some of the girls changing clothes, they started getting these feelings of discomfort. According to the lawsuit, they noticed Artemis Langford staring at them with a gigantic bulge in the zipper area of the pants. Clearly, Art was very pleased with the scenery. Maybe Art can become the next model for Target in their tuck-friendly bathing suits. According to the complaint, the young women of this sorority, they also want Artemis Langford removed because they don't behave and act like a woman. Now I'm going to read this verbatim. This comes directly from the lawsuit. His behavior does not reflect a man living as a woman, let alone a man attempting to consistently live as a woman. Other than occasionally wearing women's clothing, Langford makes little effort to resemble a woman. Plaintiffs often observe Langford with the facial hair one would expect on a man. I've got an idea. Since the young women at Woke U, Wyoming seem to be uncomfortable with the feminine appearance of Artemis Langford, I've got the perfect organization for them to join. This particular group is guaranteed to be accepting of women flaunting the 5 o'clock shadow. Matter of fact, they'll even supply complimentary just for men to ensure that feminine beard rapidly grows and looks great. To hell with Artemis Langford joining a sorority. Apply for a job in the WNBA dump. At 6'2", Art would be one of the tallest dump divers in the dump. They could utilize the strength and length to get those heavy trash cans into those dumpsters that are higher off the ground. Obviously, the young women of this sorority in Wyoming, they are winning this lawsuit, right? I mean, there's just absolutely no way that a judge in America is going to allow a biological male to live in a sorority house with young women, right? Especially in a state like Wyoming. This ain't California. This is not Oregon. Wyoming is a place where normal people live. In my opinion, there really should have been no reason for a lawsuit to be filed because it shouldn't have escalated to this point. The University of Wyoming, they should have stepped in and implemented some common sense here. Now, of course, the University of Wyoming, they're not going to do that. They can't take that risk. They don't want to be labeled transphobic. Now, this case, it was presented before Judge Alan Johnson, a district court judge in Wyoming. Alan Johnson. That sounds like the name of a normal person, a reasonable man. That sounds like the name of a man who practices common sense. Good old Al, he stepped in and saved these young women, right? After hearing the horrifying testimony from these young women, after hearing their claims of changing clothes in front of a woke boner, Judge Alan Johnson decided to dismiss the case. According to Al, Artemis Langford and the bulging pants, they've got every right to live in this sorority house. What was his reasoning? According to the sorority bylaws, every member must be a woman. Seems self-explanatory to me, but Al Johnson struggling with the concept. He was struggling with that word, woman. What is a woman? I don't think I've seen one of those in decades. The last time I saw a woman, she was being inflated with an air compressor. Judge Johnson claimed that Artemis Langford had the right to live in the sorority house because the sorority themselves failed to properly define the term woman. Are we really doing this again? What the hell is with these judges and their supposed lack of understanding of the difference between men and women? Didn't we just go through this last year with what's her name, Kataji Brown Jackson? Miss Jackson, what is a woman? Oh, I would need the assistance of a biologist. Even though I identify as a woman myself, I always struggle to properly define the term. What the hell's going on here? The truth is, Judge Alan Johnson, he used the sorority's initial decision to allow Artemis Langford to join. He used that against them. In his decision, he claimed that they voted to allow Artemis to join without proper guidelines defining a woman. In the court, they were not going through the painful process of defining a woman themselves. And to be completely fair, Judge Johnson kind of has a point. Like I was saying earlier, this sorority did this to themselves, but at the same time, These are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. I know when I was their age, I made a ton of mistakes. My judgment was god awful. I read one report earlier this afternoon that claimed that these young women were actually intimidated into voting to allow Artemis Langford to join. They were initially told that the voting would be kept secret. When they showed up to vote, they were told that their vote and identities would be publicized. At that point, they were intimidated. They feared retribution. But either way, this should have been an open and shut case in a court of law. If Judge Johnson was having difficulties defining a woman, bring in a biologist and have them examine Artemis Langford. A 6-year-old nephew will dress as a biologist for Halloween. It would take him all of 5 seconds to determine the gender of Artemis Langford. This is absolutely disgraceful. I thought colleges and universities were all about safe spaces. This is a gun-free zone, no firearms allowed. This is a safe space, no harassment allowed. Someone please explain to me how allowing a self-identifying woman who's actually a biological male inside of a sorority house constitutes as a safe space. Make that make sense. This further confirms my belief that college is a complete waste of time and money. These are no longer places of higher learning. Colleges and universities, they have become indoctrination centers. If you're not studying a specialized field like medicine, engineering, law, if you're not going into a specialized field, there is absolutely no reason for you to go to college. Let me tell you what's coming next, and this might have happened already and I didn't know about it. What I think is coming next, allowing female identifiers with propellers to live in the female dorm rooms. But give me your thoughts. Courts in Wyoming, they decide that Artemis Langford has every right to live in a sorority house. If I had a daughter in this sorority, she would be removed immediately. Hell, if I had a daughter at the University of Wyoming, she would be removed immediately. You want to know how you get the attention of these woke colleges and universities? You stop sending your kids there. Stop sending them your money. College is one of the biggest scams in the history of this country. We are setting up kids for a lifetime of failure. But I could rant about the scam of college all day. Just give me your thoughts on this story. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys tomorrow.